Welcome to the Evening Review. My name is Sohana Klache, and joining us in studio once again is the Basic Income Grant Coalition, who have decided to change the approach they're taking to preach their gospel of a universal grant. Before we go into that interview, please have a look at the headlines. Welcome to the Evening Review, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've had in the past seen the approach where the Basic Income Grant Coalition has sort of made a case for the payment of a universal income grant to Namibians between the ages of 18 and 59. But now the coalition has decided to change its approach in terms of now taking the message out there. Just why the change in approach, and how is this different from what you've been doing in the past?
Okay, when the coalition started,
yes,
the idea was to convince government of its own proposal, because now government's own NAMTEX commission proposed a basic income grant in about 2002. And the coalition said, well, here is the proposal. Your own tax commission has said a universal basic income grant is one of the best ways of reducing inequality and reducing poverty in Namibia. So the coalition then thought, well, the logical extension then is we need to convince our leaders in government to do that. And for several years we tried that. They were not quite convinced. Then came the pilot phase in Ochivero, where it was kind of implemented in practice. Let's see what will happen. And people told their stories in Ochivero about the changes. Parliamentarians went to visit, they could see for themselves. And then when the administration of the current president came in, he said a key idea is to eradicate poverty, and he appointed the chairperson of our coalition, Bishop Kameta, as Minister of Poverty Eradication. The message to us in the coalition was, it's a done deal, the basic income grant will come now. Mm-hmm. We've never been told why it was not implemented. And then in 2019, just 2 years ago, government presented a draft national social protection policy. They talked of a universal child grant, giving children from birth up to the age of 18 a universal grant, all children in Namibia. And then it talked of a basic income grant for unemployed people between 30 and 59. So we went to government and said, but this makes no sense. Mm-hmm. We fully agree with you, universal child grant, but many of the unemployed are young people below 30. And if you give a grant for unemployed, then it's an unemployment grant. It's not a basic income grant. So we went to government, we had discussions with them, we pointed out what needs to change and why a basic income grant is still needed. And then came the COVID crisis, which made matters worse because more people lost their job, more people were sliding in poverty. And local businesses basically collapsed because people couldn't buy anymore. They were so entrenched in poverty that there was no demand for many consumer goods. So local shops also suffered, closed down, more retrenchment, a downward spiral. Now, after 16, 17 years of talking just with government and convincing them, the coalition then regrouped last year and said, well, we need to provide platforms for Namibians, especially young people, and from all walks of life, to now express themselves. After all, in a democracy, we are the ones who elect government. We are the ones whose expectations are supposed to be fulfilled by those we elect to make those changes. And maybe it is time to, rather than us as the coalition of churches, NGOs, unions, youth organizations, meeting with government leaders, we let the youth, the unemployed. So essentially based on this experience over 16 years of trying to convince government, the coalition then had discussions and said, well, maybe it's time that the character of the campaign changes, that Namibians from all walks of life express themselves directly. During the consultations that the president had in his first 2 years of office, together with the Minister of Poverty Eradication, people in the region mentioned the BIG all the time, but it didn't come into the government policy. Now government is saying we don't have money, but is that really true? So young people have now looked at money lost to corruption, to mismanagement, and we could also look in future at the illicit outflows of capital in Namibia. It's a huge amount. Now, when you look at those two kind of international crime through illicit outflows and local crime through corruption and mismanagement, then there are huge resources that are available for programs that would make a difference in Namibians' lives. And so, as a coalition, we are encouraging people from all walks of life, and especially youth organizations, to express themselves, because it is their future that's at stake here. And that is a bit the background to what we are doing now as part of the Basic Income Grant campaign.
Visto, as a proponent of the Basic Income Grant, I want to hear from your end why you feel such an intervention is necessary.
Okay, Okhone, this intervention is necessitated because of the statistics. The Namibian statistics shows that we are heading towards a point of no return where abject poverty is going to be normalized, where people are going to start looking at means and ways of surviving if there are not interventions that are going to sustain their way of life. So, in a nutshell, this intervention is necessitated based on the fact that we cannot see Namibians go poor, live in poor and deploring situations while resources are being squandered, misappropriated, or looted for that matter. So it's a matter of us saying that there needs to be an intervention that's practical. Not only practical in the sense of it can be done, but practical in the sense of it can restore the way of life and the dignity of the ordinary person, the person who is unable to provide means of income for them. And yes, it's not a campaign tactic, gimmick. It's more a matter of life and death. If you look at the statistics, unemployment is skyrocketing. If you look at the number of GBV cases, these are associated to economic factors. And all of these elements, they contribute to how the cohesion of our society is structured and how it is disintegrating. So what we said was, if we're not going to make some drastic changes, implement measures that can sustain the livelihoods of people who are unable to provide for themselves, we are most likely going to find ourselves fighting each other for the little breads of crumb that whoever throws at us.
I want to ask now, given the precarious state of Namibia's finances, and I'm sure you've probably touched on that before. Where do we start in terms of financing this, given that we've had a deficit that needs to be financed, we've got skyrocketing debt, and we see more and more in the budget that we do not have money for development programs, but rather to pay salaries, and to fund expenditures. So now, where do we start? Should we start with this approach, and what are the low-hanging fruits or interventions that could be looked at?
Okay. Just to start on that, financing of the basic income grant has been proven that it is possible. And as Herbert indicated with how the process started through the NAMTEX consortium. However, it is not about the funds not being available. It is more about the funds being looted, the corruption being systemic in such a manner that these revenues that are coming from the natural resources, which are rightfully also every Namibian's entitlement, these funds are misappropriated, stolen, and they go in the direction where it should not go. So for anyone who say that our government is incapable of sustaining such an intervention, I find it quite a reckless statement. I find it quite a statement that is not properly thought out, because you just need to have strict fiscal discipline with checks and balances to make sure that illicit flows of monies and flows of corrupt money are not being just squandered or not accounted for, rather. And once you have that in check, which I personally feel it's not going to happen with the current regime, once that is in check, then you will most probably and definitely be able to have the resources to actually implement such an initiative. Yes.
Herbert, from your end?
Yes, because today the young people have put together just some of the very prominent cases of where billions of Namibian dollars was squandered. That's not only fish rot. There is also other infrastructural developments. Now we heard with August 26 about some tenders that went there, which is basically enabling the outflow of resources from Namibia with nothing tangible in return. But we have also cases of just completely misplaced priorities, which is not outright corruption, but is huge mismanagement of resources. You take the much talked about NASFAF fund, a function that by definition you can do in a little department, in a little office within the higher education ministry, namely the awarding of scholarship. Now we're building a huge, fantastic office complex with swimming pool and the works for millions of dollars, and the beneficiaries, the students, see nothing of it. So it's an expenditure that benefits a handful of people sitting in very comfortable offices. But such expenditure have no multiplier effect for the vast majority. So that is not linked directly to corruption, but it's wrong expenditure. There was even a proposal to build a $2 billion new parliament some years back. And it was young people taking that matter to the street and telling politicians, we will just not allow you to do that, because that only benefits you, who are already super privileged in the Namibian context. So this is the context in which the debate about affordability must be placed. If we believe we can maintain these spending priorities, if we can believe fishing resources, which are a national resource, which should benefit everyone in Namibia, are privatized to the benefit of a handful of well-connected Namibians, and they make multi-millions from it. The rest of the country sees virtually no benefit from it. If we continue that road, then yes, in that framework, we can then say, well, maybe there is no money for a BIG. If we turn it around and we say the national resources must be used to benefit Namibia, the expenditure that we undertake must be developmental in its outcomes, not to build fancy buildings or acquire fancy limousines for leaders. Then it is very well within the reach. We've done the practical calculation on the basis of about 500 or 1,000 Namibia dollars. At 500, it would cost about 5 to 6% of the current national budget. Now that is absolutely within reach when you say we use the national resources for national benefit, and we also use the wealth that exists in the country in a redistributive manner. Practically, those who earn huge packages would, through the tax system, fund more than the basic income grant, and thus you have a redistributive impact. In other words, someone who is rich would also get it, the 500, but would pay more back in taxes immediately. And so what you then have is a system that everyone benefits, but those who are wealthy pay more. And that is just a kind of a solidarity mechanism to address inequality. And there's no way around that. And these two mechanisms, national resources plus a kind of taxation system that redresses inequality, that would very well bring it in the ambit of possibility tomorrow. Then it can be done.
We saw with the recent, with now, following the elections, the Ministry of Poverty Eradication was done away with. And I'd like to establish how difficult has it been now, without that critical voice within government, how difficult has it been to get this message through to policymakers? And is there, are you getting scope to discuss this at that level?
Okay. Well, the difficulty is evident, and it's evident based on the change of approach that the coalition had to say, listen, we are not reaching the people who are supposed to implement this social protection initiative, so let's take it to the grassroots. The inavailability or the lack of political will within the government has pushed the coalition to say that there is no way that we are going to reach these people unless we educate the people on the grassroots on what is really happening, what the reality is, and let the people then decide to say how they are going to deal with approaching and influencing the political reform that's needed for the implementation of the PIG. So the difficulty has been there. It's been visible, it's been documented, and the approach to start from the bottom up is the method or the measure which was recommended as more effective. So with this approach, we are anticipating a much more detailed engagement from us. I am just one of the few voices, of course, who can say, let us engage our political leaders, let us engage our representatives rather, not political leaders, because they are representing our interests at the end of the day. So with that approach, we might get their attention to say that, well, the youth, not only the youth, by the way, the electorate, feels that this is a necessity. And if you want us to listen to what if you want our support for votes, this is the time to show us that you really want to transform the society and break the back of poverty. So yeah, that is basically the process that we are at hand now.
From your end?
Yes, we of course engage still parliamentarians through standing committees. In the past, we hired a bus to take members of parliament to Ochivero because they were skeptical about what they heard of it. Said, well, the best is you see it for yourself. Spend a day there, talk to people, and form your own opinion. At the end of that day, they were all convinced that this can and will work in Namibia. But then when it was brought into parliament, the debate, they didn't stand by their conviction, and they remained quiet when the former president said he thinks basic income grant will make people lazy. So these engagements will continue. And if parliamentarians were willing to engage a bit also with evidence from other countries, in South Africa now a 6-country case study was launched. They looked at Spain, Canada, US, India, Brazil, and Namibia to see the common trends of basic income grant, what it has done. And they found it was successful across those different circumstances, those different countries. And it has achieved in many aspects of life, including the economy, significant progress. And so it's not anymore that we ask parliamentarians to just believe us because we are convinced about it. We ask them to accept the evidence that is there. And secondly, to listen to the people who elected them into power. And this is what this campaign is trying to do, encourage Namibians to say, you don't have to wait for politicians to decide on your behalf. You can demand and you can direct politicians. And that's when democracy comes to life, when we move towards participatory democracy, where people of Namibia have a say in shaping what is happening in the country, instead of just waiting for politicians to decide and basically present in a top-down way their decisions. So we hope that this campaign also ignites a more meaningful democracy in our country, where people express themselves and where those in parliament, as our representatives, listen to what people are saying and proposing.
We saw with this administration the introduction of food banks, and one would like to think, well, the food banks were introduced, but obviously this was found not to be not to be a successful model. Government could not roll it out fully, and comes back again to your same to what you said earlier. So essentially, it just shows that we cannot implement a targeted social intervention program. How what do you say then to that?
Yeah, there were two major problems conceptually already. Number one, food banks take away any decision of people themselves. Your problem might be school stationery for your children. Your problem might be to buy some medication that you need. Your problem might be taxi money to get to work or get around. Now you get a bag of milli meal and a tin of fish. And it doesn't allow you to even decide, in my circumstances, how will I solve it? What can I do with the support? So the food bank says, well, we're only concerned about hunger, nothing else. The second big problem was, how do you decide as local councillors, as regional councillors, who is poor? And it became a very arbitrary way of going into households and then saying, like, are you employed? How much are you earning? Okay, you get it now, but when you get a job, we immediately take it away from you. Or it was dished out more on party political allegiances. Like, I'm now coming around, and oh, now Visto is my dear brother in my party, so he will definitely get it because we were together. And you deviate from them. So it was virtually impossible to have an objective criteria. And poverty is multifaceted. And government's own report, the Namibia Statistics Agency, talks about the multiple forms of poverty that people are exposed to. The food bank covers only a tiny bit, was limited to only certain regions, and very importantly, it trampled on the dignity of beneficiaries. We've all seen sometimes photos in the papers. In fact, I remember editor Toivo Jimela mentioned when they took a photo at one of the handovers, one of the recipients said, please don't publish that photo. I don't want everyone to see that I'm standing here getting food, because your dignity is violated. You are paraded as, yeah, you are amongst those who can't look after themselves. So here government comes and gives you a bag of milli meal. And that's very degrading, because the person wants to work, but there are no jobs. The person maybe went from door to door for a year or more and couldn't find work. And now being paraded to say thank you for getting a bag of milli meal, that is not respecting people's dignity. And that is where we say conceptually the food bank was problematic from the beginning. And it's not surprising that it didn't make a dent in poverty levels in Namibia.
Visto, before I allow you to weigh in on the subject, just quickly like to go for a commercial break.
Sure.
As we hone in on this subject of the basic income grant, before we continue with our conversation, we are going to go for a quick commercial break.
Season 1 of the Hunters Chill session is coming to a close. To celebrate Hunters and the Namibian Sun, we'll be having an exclusive invite-only event at Access Lounge on the 23rd of November. You can be part of this. Stand a chance to win exclusive double tickets for you and a friend to attend the Hunters Chill finale. WhatsApp a picture of you and your friend chilling with your favorite Hunters to 084 000 9820. Hunters, refreshes like nothing on earth. Not for persons under the age of 18. T's and C's apply.
Okhone, the issue of the food bank we don't want to lambast government only. Initiatives need to get credit where they are, but the problem with the food bank was there was not proper consultation. As Herbert said, the conceptualization was not proper to say what will be the most effective, and the lack of consultation or the absence of it was the cause of the failure, because as Herbert said, government has been engaged on numerous times on the most effective means of alleviating poverty. So with food bank and the current one, which the president is trying to implement, which he says they're going to change the food bank and it's going to become a cash subsidy for 42,000 people, we are talking yet again about a discriminatory measure. So are you implementing, or are you alleviating poverty rather, or are you discriminating from the masses? So what we are saying is these interventions should not be selective. Once they become selective, then they fail the purpose of which it should be serving. These initiatives should be universal in the sense that Okhone can access it if he is in need of it, and so can anyone else, regardless of your financial, your social, or your personal status in life. So in a nutshell, what we're saying is, well, if the government is serious about poverty eradication, they should really pull up the socks. There's been ample evidence shown, studies, engagements, and they should just consult the people who have been proposing this initiative to them for the longest of time. And of course, it's not only the government, it also involves political parties, because we have a government that is represented in parliament by multi-party system. They should also indicate to the public to say that this is what we feel about the universal basic income grant, and engage us to say that we hear what you say, but we might not be in power or in government, but we can probably push for those reforms within the parliament and so on. So it requires consultation, and not only consultation, but a structured engagement where people can understand the importance is not about creating a certain status for each other, for themselves, but actually delivering on the needs of the poor, which is alleviating poverty.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Evening Review.
Appreciate it. Thank you, and we appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into the Evening Review. That's that for this week. Good night.